The hall still stank of blood. Robert Baratheon stood over Jaime Lannister's body, his broad chest rising and falling with the weight of what he had just done. The Kingslayer's golden hair was matted with sweat and red streaks. His sword lay shattered beside him, the famous lion sigil of his house dulled with dirt and gore. Everyone in the throne room had gone silent. The clatter of steel boots and nervous breaths echoed like drumbeats. The Iron Throne loomed behind Robert like some twisted monster made of swords, and for once it looked less menacing than the man who had just struck down a Lannister prince. "I warned him!" Robert growled, his voice hoarse from battle, and drink. Told him to put down his blade, told him I'd not suffer treachery again, and still he raised it against me. No one moved. Not Sir Barristan, not Renly, not even Eddard Stark, who stood just steps away, his hand instinctively resting on the pommel of ice. Ned's voice was low. He was the Queen's brother. This will bring war. Robert spat on the marble floor. Then let war come. I won't be ruled by a boy with golden curls and no honor. Let Tywin send his banners. I'll send them back in coffins. The air shifted. A chill crept in, though it was summer. A raven let out a lonely caw from the broken windows high above, as if the gods themselves had just seen a moment not meant to happen. Ned stared at the lifeless body of Jaime Lannister, the man who had once murdered the Mad King. The same man who had now died at the hands of a king too tired of deception to care about consequences. "You've just killed the Queen's brother," Ned said slowly, "and now you'll make her your enemy." Robert barked a laugh, bitter and hollow. "She's been my enemy since the day we were wed. At least now there's no pretending." The doors opened with a bang. Cersei Lannister stormed in, clad in emerald silk and fury, her face twisted as her eyes found Jaime's body. "No!" She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She walked over like she was sleepwalking, dropped to her knees beside her brother, and touched his blood-slicked face. "Monster," she whispered, not looking at Robert. "You'll burn for this." Robert's hand twitched at the hilt of his warhammer. "Say that again, and I'll send you to join him." Ned stepped between them before either could move. Further. "Enough! The realm bleeds already. Don't give it more wounds to heal." But the wound was already too deep. Cersei rose with murder in her eyes, her lips tight, voice shaking. "You'll regret this. Lannisters always repay their debts." Robert didn't flinch. "Then come collect." Later, as the sun fell and the capital buzzed with rumors, Ned sat in his chambers, writing a raven to Winterfell. He kept glancing out the window, half expecting the city to erupt into flames before dawn. Robert had done the unthinkable. Not just in killing a nobleman, but in who he had killed. Jaime Lannister wasn't just a knight. He was a symbol, a shield around the Lannister name, a piece of power that Tywin never meant to lose. The Starks had come south for peace. Now, Ned realized, he had stepped into a kingdom already halfway to ruin. And this was just the beginning. The next morning dawned heavy with tension. King's Landing didn't wake up the way it usually did. There was no marketplace noise, no drunken singing from the inns, and no bells ringing from the sept. Just silence, sharp and eerie. Word of Jaime Lannister's death had spread like wildfire, whispered from servant to stable boy, from guardsman to gossip. And with it came fear, not fear of war, that had always been possible. This was fear of something deeper, fear that the realm's cracks had finally split open. Robert sat slouched on the Iron Throne, a goblet already in hand despite the early hour, his crown tilted slightly to one side, his eyes red and distant. Across the room, Ned stood stiff and unreadable as the small council convened under a black cloud. Varys was the first to speak, his soft voice almost gentle. "This action, Your Grace, it will not go unanswered. The Lannisters are not known for their patience or mercy. They're not known for their loyalty either," Robert snapped. "Jaime raised a blade to his king. You think I'd let a butcher live because he's pretty and his family's Rich. Littlefinger chuckled under his breath. Oh, I'd wager a few gold dragons that exactly that has saved men before. Robert shot him a look that could turn men to stone. Peter just smiled, as he always did, untouched by consequence. Renly, sitting at the king's right, cleared his throat. Brother, the Lannisters have power, gold, men, alliances. This isn't a tavern brawl you can walk away from. Robert drained his goblet. Let Tywin come. Let him bring every man from Casterly Rock. I'll show him what happens to traitors. But as confident as Robert sounded, even Ned could see the cracks. This wasn't the Robert he'd fought with at the Trident. That man was full of fire. This one was full of wine and ghosts. And somewhere in the Red Keep, Cersei was watching, waiting. Ned visited her chambers that afternoon, not as a hand of the king, but as an old friend trying to stop something terrible. She didn't rise to greet him. She didn't speak at first. She only stared at the fire, her hand clutching a pendant around her neck, one he recognized. Jaime's. You should have stopped him, she said coldly. I tried, Ned replied, but Jaime drew first. It was a death match before it even began. He knew Robert would never forgive him for what happened with Aerys. He always knew he had to die standing. Her voice broke slightly, but she straightened. I'll make sure Robert regrets it. I'll make sure you do too if you stand in my way. Ned kept his voice steady. And how many must die before your vengeance is satisfied? As many as it takes. She turned then, eyes gleaming. He took my twin, Lord Stark. He took half of me. I'll take everything from him, I swear it. That night the bells finally rang, but not for mourning. They rang for war. A rider had arrived from the Westerlands, Tywin Lannister's seal, stamped in red wax. The message was brief. My son's blood demands justice. You will receive none. Casterly Rock comes for the throne. Robert read the note aloud to the court, tore it in half, and tossed it into the flames. Then we'll meet the lion with fire and steel. But as he turned to leave, Ned caught his sleeve. You've started something none of us can end. Robert paused, jaw tight. Then we end it on the battlefield, where it belongs. As the king stormed out, Ned knew the war wasn't just with the Lannisters. It was in every corner of the realm now. Loyalties would shift, old wounds would reopen, and worse, some truths, long buried, were about to claw their way into the light. The ride to Riverrun was tense and unrelenting. Ned Stark had set out, within days of Tywin's declaration, tasked with rallying support among the Tullys and the Riverlords. He travelled light, with only a small guard and Sir Roderick at his side. The wind smelled of smoke, even this far from the capital. Villages they passed looked uneasy, windows shuttered, doors barred. War hadn't yet reached them, but fear had. Robert had stayed behind in King's Landing, rallying the Crown's forces, calling banners from the Stormlands and the Reach. But it was already clear the Lannisters were moving faster. Tywin's army had begun to march from Casterly Rock, and ravens told of golden lions pillaging their way through the Riverlands, burning farms, hanging suspected traitors, and collecting taxes with swords. Ned had seen war before. He remembered how quickly it made monsters of men, how it made honor a burden, not a virtue. When they finally reached Riverrun, the banners of House Tully flew high, but they were stained from rain and battle dust. Edmure met him at the gate, face drawn and sleepless. They're testing us, Edmure said, not bothering with formalities. Lannister riders hit a supply wagon just yesterday, left the guards with their throats opened, fathers confined to his bed, and half the bannermen want to strike back already. Ned nodded grimly. And they will, once they have a king behind them. But even as he spoke the words, he felt the weight of them. Robert was a king in title, but what good was a crown if your judgment reeked of ale and vengeance? Inside the great hall, Catelyn greeted him with a mix of relief and worry. Their reunion was brief. Ned didn't speak of Jaime or Cersei or how fast the realm was falling apart. He only mentioned Sansa and Arya, safe and quiet in the Red Keep. For now. As they spoke late into the night, a rider brought new word. The Lannisters had taken the town of Fairmarket, dozens slain, houses burned. Tywin was cutting through the Riverlands like a rusted blade through flesh. This wasn't war, not yet. It was punishment. "He's not trying to take the throne," Edmure muttered. "He's trying to burn the road to it." Ned felt it in his bones. This wasn't just retaliation for Jaime. This was Tywin's fury, unleashed, cold, calculated and deliberate. It was a message. Back in King's Landing, things had taken a darker turn. Cersei had vanished from court. Her chambers were found empty, her guards replaced by Lannister men Robert hadn't appointed. It was Renly who found the note she left behind, cryptic but damning. "My brother's blood will stain your legacy. You wore the crown to avenge Lyanna. You'll die wearing it for killing Jaime." Robert flew into a rage, of course. Accused her of treason, betrayal, adultery, screamed at the walls of the Red Keep like they were to blame. He ordered her arrested on sight, but she was gone, and with her, young Tommen and Myrcella. Only Joffrey remained in the city, and even he began to act strangely. He asked questions that made the council uneasy, about power, about ruling without a king, about how long Robert would really last. Varys, ever the whisperer, leaned into Ned during a quiet council meeting. "When lions scatter, beware the cubs. They grow teeth faster than you'd expect." And then came the raven from the wall. Jon Snow's letter, brief and choked in cold ink. "Benjen has gone missing. Strange shadows stir beyond the wall. Wildlings are fleeing. Something is coming." Ned closed the message with a heavy heart. The world was unraveling. South to north, family to kingdom, secrets to swords. And he was running out of time to hold any of it together. Riverrun stood on the edge of war. And somewhere in the dark halls of Casterly Rock, Tywin Lannister was smiling. War announced itself not with a roar, but with a silence that suffocated the Riverlands. It was dawn when Riverrun's gates opened, and House Tully's riders, joined by Stark bannermen and Baratheon allies, thundered onto the open roads. Ned rode at the front, armor polished but unadorned. He wasn't there to inspire awe. He was there to stop a kingdom from bleeding itself dry. The first village they reached was already ash and bone. Blackened timbers jutted from the earth like broken ribs. Bodies hung from trees, not for punishment, but message. A Lannister banner, soaked in blood, fluttered from a burned-out watchtower. They buried the dead. They didn't speak. Back in King's Landing, Robert was unraveling. With Cersei gone, he'd taken to the bottle harder than ever. He'd summoned no less than 5 whores to his chamber in a single night, trying to drown the guilt of killing Jaime with skin and wine. But guilt wasn't a fire that could be drowned. It only simmered until it turned into something worse. When Ned's latest raven arrived, detailing Tywin's latest massacre in Harrentown, Robert didn't react with rage. He didn't react at all. He stared at the parchment, then at the fire, and whispered, "He was right. I was never fit for this chair." Renly, standing nearby, tried to keep his composure. "You're still king, Robert. The people need you to be strong." "I was strong once," Robert murmured, "on the battlefield, on the Trident, but that was war. This is something else." The council was fracturing. Littlefinger spent more time whispering to lords than advising the crown. Varys vanished for days at a time, and when he returned, he only spoke in riddles about a storm that eats kings and crowns alike. Joffrey, barely 15, began holding his own little court in the Tower of the Hand. He demanded his own sword, practiced with Sir Boros like he was training for a battle no one else saw coming, and then, one evening, a messenger arrived. Not from the Rock, from Highgarden, Mace Tyrell. He offered allegiance to the crown, not to Robert, but it came with conditions. Joffrey was to be betrothed to Margaery Tyrell. Robert laughed the first time he heard it. My son wed to some perfumed flower from the reach, over my dead. But he stopped mid-sentence, because he remembered what kind of flower Circe had been once. The crown was desperate, the coffers were bleeding. Tywin controlled the gold, the fear, the momentum. The Tyrells were the last major house not to pick a side. Robert summoned Ned's Raven again, stared at the crude map drawn at the bottom. The Lannister army's slow, careful approach toward River Run. The war hadn't reached the gates of the capital, but its shadow stretched across every corridor of the Red Keep, and the worst shadow hadn't even arrived yet. Far to the east, on the storm-racked sea, a ship made its way toward Westeros. On board, cloaked and silent, was a figure whose blood could burn cities, whose name was spoken only in frightened whispers, Daenerys Stormborn. The last dragon had received word of a dead Kingslayer, a realm in flames, and a crown teetering on madness, and she was coming home. They called it the Week of Teeth. 7 days, 7 battles, everyone bloodier than the last. Tywin Lannister moved through the Riverlands like a god of vengeance. With Jaime dead and his name sullied by royal hands, Tywin no longer cared for diplomacy or delay. His men torched fields, slaughtered livestock, and sent severed heads to River Run with mockery carved into the skulls. He wasn't just making war, he was making a point. Ned Stark had barely slept. He spent each night hunched over maps with Edmure, Tully Bannerman, and envoys from the Vale and the Stormlands. But for every plan they made, Tywin shattered 3. "We need Robb," Ned whispered to himself one morning, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "He's a boy, but he's a Stark. The North would rally." Catelyn hesitated. Bringing Robb south would put a wolf into a den of lions. Then maybe it's time the lions remembered wolves bite hardest when cornered. In the capital, Robert could no longer pretend. Joffrey had stopped asking questions. He had started giving orders. He dismissed council members without approval. He interrogated gold cloaks like they were disloyal dogs. He even slapped Tommen once, hard enough to split his lip, for speaking kindly of their mother. The boy was turning into something else. Not a prince, not even a future king, a tyrant in training. Robert finally snapped during a small council session. "You think you're ready for this crown, boy?" he roared, staggering toward Joffrey. "You think ruling is shouting and swinging swords?" Joffrey stood his ground, eyes cold and sharp. "I think ruling is about being feared." Robert struck him, hard. Joffrey fell, blood streaming from his nose, but he didn't cry. He just stared, and he smiled. Ned's next raven came just hours later, and it brought no comfort. Tywin had taken Seaguard, and worse, he'd captured Lord Jason Mallister alive. His terms, Ned Stark's head, or Mallister burns alive. Robert drank that night until his hands shook, until his thoughts wandered back to Lyanna and to Rhaegar, and to the way things were supposed to be. He looked down at his crown like it was a chain. That same night, Sir Barristan Selmy came to him in silence. "Your Grace," he said gently, "I've served 3 kings. I buried 2. I won't bury a 3rd, not like this." Robert laughed bitterly. "Then what do you suggest, old friend? That I ride out myself, face Tywin alone and die a hero?" Barristan didn't smile. "Yes, or send the one man left, with the honor to command." Robert set the cup down. He knew who that man was, knew he'd never say yes, but the next morning the king sent a raven north. To Robb Stark, a royal summons. Not as a hostage, not as a child, but as warden of the North, commander of the Crown's armies. He was being asked to lead. Ned was stunned. He read the letter twice before he let Catelyn see it. Robb was only 16, but war made men fast, and grief made them faster. By sunset, another raven came, from the east, from Dragonstone. A merchant had seen a girl with silver hair board. A ship under Targaryen colours. With her was a man in black armour, and a beast they swore breathed smoke in the night. The message ended with 4 words. The dragon wakes again. 3 kings, 3 bloodlines, 1 throne, and a storm was coming to drown them all. Robb Stark crossed the neck with 20,000 men at his back. The ravens flew ahead of him, one to King's Landing, another to River Run, but his sword led the message. The North was not broken. It had not forgotten the blood on its soil, nor the cold silence from the Iron Throne when its people burned. He wore no crown. Yet every soldier who marched beside him called him King in the North. At first, Ned objected. He begged Robert through Raven and Ryder not to put that weight on his son, not when the realm was already cracking under too many crowns. But Robert had stopped replying. He had made the decision. It wasn't honor, it was desperation. By the time Robb reached River Run, Tywin Lannister had turned west toward the twins, cutting off the supply lines and laying siege to the only bridge strong enough for a host to cross. Robb knew what he had to do. He met with Walder Frey under tense banners, wearing the same quiet steel Ned had worn years ago during Robert's rebellion. He didn't flinch at Frey's demands. Marriage, titles, wardships, Robb accepted them all with calm calculation. Not because he believed in oaths, because he believed in strategy. The boy was gone. In his place stood the general. At River Run, Ned met Robb for the first time not as father to son, but commander to commander. The embrace was brief. There was no time for long words or fatherly doubts. "Your men believe in you," Ned said. "Make sure they have reason to keep doing so." Robb nodded once. "I will." And then the wolves moved. The siege at the Twins didn't last long. Robb's forces hit the Lannister line under cover of night, using the old paths through the woods the Freys had once used to smuggle goods. The battle was brutal, fast, and costly. Hundreds fell. But the gates held. Tywin had been outplayed. He pulled back to Harrenhal furious and afraid, because for the first time a Stark had outmaneuvered him. But Tywin wasn't the only lion, sharpening his claws. Back in King's Landing, Joffrey had taken full control of the court. Robert no longer ruled. He stumbled between wine and whores, and when the council met, it was Joffrey who sat at the table, flanked by Cersei's old guards, who had mysteriously returned to the capital. He had Sir Meryn Trant execute a servant in front of the court, claiming the boy had spit in his food. He forced a blacksmith to make a new crown, sharper, heavier. His words, "Let it cut me, let it remind me who I am." Ned was still away in the Riverlands when the next betrayal hit. A raven reached him in the dark hours of morning. Robert Baratheon was dead. The letter said it was the wine. No signs of struggle, no poison detected. But those close to the king knew better. Varys had gone missing. Littlefinger was suddenly flush with coin, and the Maester who examined the body vanished within the week. Joffrey crowned himself king the next day. No vote, no council, no consent. He stood on the steps of the Great Sept with Cersei at his side and declared himself protector of the realm, the first order of his rule. Lord Eddard Stark is to be arrested for treason. When the Raven reached River Run, Ned read the words in silence. His hands didn't shake, but his heart turned to ice. "They mean to kill me," he said, "and if they do, they'll kill the realm too." Robb stood beside him, eyes hard. "Then we go to King's Landing." But Ned shook his head. "You go, you march, but I ride ahead." Robb frowned. "Alone? I'm not bringing a war to the gates while my daughters are still inside." Catelyn stepped forward. "And what if they kill you before we arrive?" Ned looked at her, then at Robb. "Then burn the Red Keep to the ground." The road to King's Landing had never felt longer. Ned Stark rode with only 5 men, trusted ones, Sir Roderick, Jory Castle's younger cousin, and 3 northern riders with quiet loyalty in their bones. They rode under false banners at night, cloaked and hooded by day. The gold cloaks on the roads asked questions, but Coin kept them uninterested. Fear did the rest. He reached the capital on the fourth evening after Robert's death. The city had changed. The people were quieter, darker. The usual street noise had thinned into murmurs and glances. King's Landing was holding its breath, and everyone knew why. The wolf had returned to the lion's den. He didn't go to the Red Keep. Not yet. He went first to the black cells. There, he found Varys. The spider wasn't chained. He sat in the corner of the cell, legs crossed, hands folded, watching the shadows move. "They told me you were dead," Ned said. "I often am," Varys replied, eyes half-lidded. "Dead, missing, whispering from the walls. I'm whatever the realm needs me to be." "Then be useful." "I tried," Varys sighed, "but the boy listens to no one, and the mother listens only to vengeance. Jaime was her heart. Robert cracked it, but you shattered it. There's no logic left in her now." Ned opened the door and motioned, "Get out. If you can still help the realm, help me." Varys rose slowly. "You know this is suicide." "I know they have my daughters, and if I don't come, they'll bleed them in front of the court." That was enough. By the time Ned reached the Red Keep, the throne room was already filled. Joffrey sat high on the Iron Throne, legs too short to touch the ground, wearing a new crown of twisted steel that dug into his brow. Cersei stood beside him, robed in black and green, eyes swollen but dry. The court buzzed like hornets, too scared to sit, too proud to kneel. Ned walked straight into the hall like a ghost returning to haunt them all. Every head turned, every whisper stopped. Cersei's lips barely moved. "Kill him." But Joffrey raised a hand. "No. Let him speak." Ned stepped forward, cloak heavy with the scent of the road and the weight of truth. "I'm not here to kneel. I'm here to take my daughters." The court gasped. Cersei laughed bitterly. "And what will you offer in return, Lord Stark? Forgiveness or war?" "I offer the truth," Ned said, voice like winter. "Robert didn't die of wine. You killed him." Silence, then chaos. Cersei's face didn't twitch. Joffrey stood, face tight. "You lie. Your mother killed your father. She fed him poison slow enough to look like sickness. Ask Maester Pycelle." "Oh, wait, you can't. He's dead, isn't he?" The Queen stepped forward. "You have no proof." "I don't need it," Ned growled, "because you just proved it for me." Guards stepped forward, but Sir Barristan blocked their path. "Stand down." Then Renly stepped forward too. "Let the Northmen speak." Suddenly the court divided. Some drew blades, some drew breath, and some waited for the fire. Joffrey looked to his mother, then to the crowd, then back at Ned. "You think you scare me? My grandfather will burn your armies to ash. My mother will tear your house apart, and I will put your head on a spike beside traitors." Ned looked him in the eye. "You are no king, you are a boy in a stolen crown." The throne room erupted. Cersei screamed. Guards surged forward. But so did Northern Steel. Sir Roderick and the others drew fast. Varys vanished into smoke. And in the chaos, a small voice cried out from the side of the room. "Sansa!" Arya. She had hidden, waited, watched. And now she ran for her father. Ned turned just in time to catch her, pulling her behind him as swords clashed all around. One Lannister guard fell, then a Stark, then a Kingsguard. Blood spilled across the floor as the Iron Throne sat untouched, mocked by the chaos beneath it. And in that moment, as Arya clung to him and Sansa screamed from the dais, Ned made a choice. He turned, raised his sword, and charged for the throne itself, not to take it, to destroy it. He swung once, twice, steel against steel, sparks flew, and though he couldn't break it, the message was clear. This crown was not worth the blood it demanded. He turned back, and that's when the arrow found him. In the side, then another, then a third. He fell to his knees, arms around Arya as the world dimmed. But he smiled, because she was alive. and somewhere behind them a sound began to rise. Horns, northern horns. Robb Stark had arrived. The gates of King's Landing burned before sunset. Robb Stark rode through black smoke and screams, a dire wolf banner whipping in the wind behind him. The Lannister forces scrambled to regroup, but the city's defenses weren't built to hold back the north. Not anymore. The gold cloaks were divided, half bought, half terrified. And the common folk? They had no love for boy kings and vanished. Queens. They opened the gates, or didn't stop them from opening. War came pouring in. Robb didn't pause. He didn't speak. He carved his path straight to the Red Keep. At the great sept of Baelor, a pyre already burned. Ned Stark's body had been dumped like garbage, arrows still in his side, his sword left lying beside him. They hadn't even had the decency to finish him clean. Sansa knelt beside the flames, eyes hollow. Arya stood near the steps, her face unreadable, blood staining her tunic. Robb dismounted without a word. He dropped to one knee, pressed a hand to the blackened stone, and whispered, "You held the line, father." Then he rose and swore never to fall back again. Inside the Red Keep, Joffrey was losing his crown, not metaphorically, literally. The weight of it had cut into his scalp, and in the chaos of the invasion, he had tried to remove it himself. The boy was screaming in a locked chamber, surrounded by Lannister guards, too afraid to face the wolf that now howled at their door. Cersei was gone, vanished. Rumors swirled of a ship headed to Essos, gold-laden and full of fire and plans. Tommen and Myrcella had been smuggled out days earlier, but Joffrey remained, because he wouldn't run, because pride does not leave when fear enters, it only gets louder. When Robb entered the throne room, he found the boy king on the steps of the Iron Throne, hands shaking around a crossbow twice too large for him. "You're traitors," Joffrey screamed. "I'm the king." Robb didn't raise his sword. He didn't need to. Arya stepped past him. She moved silently, blade in hand, needle thin and precise. Her eyes weren't angry. They were calm, focused. She reached Joffrey before he even realized she'd moved, and with one clean motion, she buried her blade in his throat. No one stopped her. The blood pooled fast. It gurgled out with all his gasping demands for obedience, all his whimpers about thrones and crowns, and lions and legacies. Then he was quiet, and for the first time in years, the throne room was still. Robb turned to the gathered lords and captains behind him, some from the north, some from the Riverlands, a few even from the Reach, sent by Margaery Tyrell's brothers in secret. He didn't ask for their loyalty. He simply said, "The war is done here, but the game isn't over." Because far across the sea, Daenerys Targaryen had landed. She marched through Essos with armies of freed men and dragons that now filled the sky with smoke. She'd heard the Lannisters had fallen. She knew Robert was dead. She didn't care about Robb Stark. She wanted the Iron Throne, and she was coming to take it. Robb stood before the throne and stared at it long and hard. His men waited. Would he sit? Would he claim it? Would the boy who had marched from Winterfell as a frightened son now crown himself king of the Seven Kingdoms? No. Robb turned his back on it and walked away. "The throne is cursed," he said. "Let it rot with the men who bled for it." He walked down the hall, Arya beside him, Sansa following, and left the Iron Throne cold and empty in the smoke-lit hall. And thus the war ended, not with a crown, but with a choice. A Stark chose family over power. A lion cub died with a whisper. And in the east, a dragon spread her wings. The game was far from over, but Westeros had just changed forever.